accomplished it. I like to joke that I'm old school when it comes to technology, as I showed some folks earlier. This is how old school I am. I just learned how to turn this on. I feel like I've accomplished something. Well, first, let me just thank you all for being here. This is an amazing group, and I want to commend all of you for being part of this important village and this important community. Helen, I was about to suggest when you asked folks to introduce themselves, they were really enjoying each other. I was going to volunteer to just let them spend the next hour getting to know each other, and we could forego my part. But, again, it's a real pleasure, and I'll speak more about the importance of community and the village movement and what you're doing. But back to your question about my background.
And really, if there's some aspects of your childhood that influenced you to social policy and public service.
And you should also know, because I'm a professor, and it's wonderful to see all my students out there, so they know as a professor, I can go on for hours. And so I've given Helen permission to keep my comments concise so we can get through the evening or through the afternoon. But my background about why I'm so impressed with what you do. I was born and raised in a small town. Grew up in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other, everyone supported each other. Salinas, California. My mother was a single mom with 9 children in public housing, but she was known as Doña Maria, which in Spanish means you look up to her, you do what she says. She's the leader of this neighborhood. And it was just a wonderful sense of a village where everyone watched out for each other, everyone supported each other. They may not have had much in terms materially, but they had everything in terms of a community. That has always inspired me, and I believe what you're doing is recreating that sense of community. But what has really motivated me to be involved in civic public service, serving community at all levels, is because of all the things that were done for my family, my mom, my siblings, and to just show how grateful we are. All 9 of my brothers and sisters are successful professionals, their families, and because my mother gave so much to our community of Salinas, today there is a community center in our hometown named after her, the Maria J. Torres Gill Community Center. So that's my motivation.
Mr. Otway, I watched a video of you being interviewed by the former dean of the School of Social Work at USC. And you made a statement that said you never knew that there were white people who were poor. So could you talk about that?
That wasn't quite politically correct, but it was an accurate statement. Again, growing up where we did, our family were farm workers, that small town of Salinas, and all the people around us were Filipinos, African Americans, Chinese, Mexicans, and it wasn't until I went back east to Boston to go to graduate school where I came to know other communities, Italian, Irish, Portuguese, who were also struggling. And it made me realize that poverty can be universal, vulnerability can be universal, and therefore helping each other has to be universal. And so it was eye-opening for me to leave my cloistered community to realize, wow, we are not alone. We're not the only ones that are struggling.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you became the first Assistant Secretary on Aging, and what did you do in that role?
You know, I'll tell a quick story. Grace Farwell, one of my students, is there in the back. And when President Clinton was campaigning and then got elected, Grace, I think you were one of several students in my class on social policy and aging, or aging policy, that would come up and say, are you going to Washington, D.C.? Are you going to Washington, D.C.? And of course, when it comes to political appointments, you never know the vagaries of politics, connection, who's in and who's out. But in my case, I've been very involved in politics at the local, state, and national level. I worked on the presidential campaign. Because I had gone to school back east, I had many networks of friends and others that were connected with the Dukakis family, Kennedy family. But I think most of all, I was fortunate to be on the cusp, the cutting edge, and you made reference to this, Helen, of a growing national awareness of aging and the aging of baby boomers. So the timing was perfect. One of our first baby boomer presidents, recognizing that the country was changing demographically, this was back in 1992, having been involved, and so when he got elected, I received a call from Donna Shalala, who was President Clinton's nominee as Secretary of Health and Human Services. And so she reached out to me, and I like to tell this story, which is quite true. She called and said, "Fernando, we want you to join the administration. We'd like you to be Commissioner of the Administration on Aging." And my response was pretty quick, "Donna, I've worked in Washington twice. I know that agency, it's important, but it's at the bottom level of HHS. It's stuck at the bottom level of the bureaucracy. And plus, I promised my wife after moving her twice in our career to work on the Hill, to work in the Carter administration, I can't do it." Her response was, "What will it take to get you here?" So I gave a long list of demands. "You will elevate the position to Assistant Secretary. You'll give me the nicest office in the Humphrey Building, the headquarters. You'll give me X number of political appointees that I will pick that will work for me. I'll have complete access to your office and to OMB, all the different places. And I want a key to your personal elevator, so I can go up and down." Of course, there was no way she could meet all those demands. I told my wife, "Not to worry, dear, we're not going back." I made all these onerous requests. She called back a month later and said, "Fernando, we worked it out with the president, OMB, and the congressional committees. Everything you want, you have." That's how it happened.
That's a great story.
My wife wasn't all that happy, but she put up with it, and we're glad we did.
So what is that position about? What do you do?
The elevating what was Commissioner of the Administration on Aging, which is known as the Aging Network. Here in this area, it's the LA County and LA City Aging Departments. They're funded through the Administration on Aging. But it was important in that position to also be connected with the other important federal agencies, the Social Security Administration, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, with HUD and Transportation for their programs, with Treasury, which handles many of the tax preferences and the tax issues that affect so many of us. So that position allows one to go across the federal government and to be able, as we call it, to be a player in terms of the policy deliberations, the legislative initiatives, and also working, of course, closely with the White House. So that position now gives issues of aging greater prominence and the ability to have more influence across the federal government.
So let's get a little bit to a number of your specialties, and certainly one is diversity. And do you look at diversity through an aging lens? And what are the issues confronting us, and what are some of the solutions?
Where do we start? I just turned 70 years of age, and so now I'm more reflective about it. And we all should, I'm sure all of us think back upon our lives and our careers. When I worked on my dissertation, it was my first research was on Hispanic elderly, the aging of the Latino population. And then throughout my career, I moved into the broader issues of the politics of aging and public policy issues. So I kind of broadened the scope of what I did. At this stage of my career, I've come full circle. Not so much to focusing on Mexican American or Hispanic elderly, but on the aging of the diverse populations and the emergence of new populations. And what this means in a shorthand is that the United States is becoming majority minority. By 2046, according to the Census Bureau, the United States will have a new majority composed of African American, Native American, Asian Pacific Islanders, and Hispanics or Latinos. And the non-Hispanic white population will become the minority. So diversity is about these changing demographics that will have profound impact on recreating, hopefully, a new type of community that includes these diverse communities. And within these diverse communities, Latinos will be the largest population, but the fastest growing group in terms of proportion is actually the Asian and Pacific Islander population. So to leave you with this kind of provocative comment, never before in the history of the United States, our nearly 300 years as a republic, have we seen two twin demographic trends come together. The aging of the population, and we represent the doubling of the older population with baby boomers, at the same time that the United States is becoming diverse and majority minority. That's the big part of diversity.
So, is there an age-related issue?
There are, yes, and yes. I was also on the board of AARP for many years, and you term out after X number of years. I just termed out recently. And we had great debates in the board about whether or not immigration should be on AARP's agenda. It's no secret, obviously, by looking at the headlines and media and TV and cable, that immigration is a big issue and can be quite polarizing. But ultimately, AARP, to their great wisdom, came to realize that aging is about immigration and immigration is about aging. In two ways, and please cut me short on this one, but I'll just throw out a few examples. Aging is about immigration and diversity because it's about the future workforce. Who's going to work and pay the taxes to support whatever public benefits we feel are important, whether it's Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare. Aging is about immigration and diversity because it's about the long-term care workforce, the home care workers, the long-term care workers, which are increasingly all about immigrants and minority population. But aging and immigration and diversity also plays out in terms of electoral politics because the key part of the electorate happen to be older persons who vote more often and more reliably. And therefore, those 50 and over, 55 and over, 65 and over are the critical part of the electorate. And they happen to be at the moment primarily non-Hispanic white. The 50 and younger part of the electorate is now majority minority, but their voting rates do not equal in terms of reliability that of the 50 and over. So at the moment, we have a disconnect between the interests of that 50 and over electorate, public safety, lower taxes, senior programs, and the under 50 electorate, which doesn't vote as often yet, which is about education, employment, infrastructure, public support. So that is, we are going through a moment in American history where we're trying to sort out what does it mean in recreating a sense of community when we're going through these demographic changes and the tensions and opportunities that aging and diversity are going to force upon us.
So are there some specifics when we talk about the diverse population in terms of diverse aging population, in terms of economic security, health, housing? Are there issues confronting us that are particular to that population?
Let me give two ends of that just as example. The first, retirement security, and the other, family and caregiving. when in addressing Helen's question. On the first, in terms of retirement, when we talk about, so what are the differentials in terms of age, race, ethnicity? That's what you're asking about. And the differences are quite stark, meaning that older Hispanics and African Americans and certain Asian Pacific Islander groups like Hmong and Samoans and even Vietnamese have dramatically lower rates of pension, savings, retirement coverage, and therefore highly dependent on Social Security, assuming they're documented and they qualify for that. So we are witnessing with minority elderly, especially in those particular groups, a greater sense of vulnerability and even poverty in that part of the minority aging groups and their families. So we're going to have to address the economic disparities that we are finding between whites, which is called non-Hispanic whites, and these particular ethnic groups. And that also plays into the disparities in terms of opportunities for young people in those diverse populations. What are their opportunities to succeed in life and be productive citizens in this country? So with retirement security, we're facing the same kind of disparities in terms of economic and social opportunities as we're facing across much of the country. The other side, caregiving, here is where we can learn from diverse populations. One of the things that these immigrant diverse populations continue to give to this country and to themselves is what in some Asian cultures is known as filial piety or filial obligation. And certainly among African Americans, Latinos, the different Asian groups, Japanese, Koreans, Chinese, Pacific Islanders, a greater sense of we should take care of our own, and we should especially take care of our elders and honor our elders, and as much as possible take care of our own parents and grandparents. That's known as filial piety. I keynoted a conference in Taiwan last year on long-term care and filial obligations, because countries like Taiwan, Japan, mainland China, Korea, Malaysia are facing their own tensions with aging. They are aging rapidly, having fewer children. They want desperately to keep that sense of filial obligations. We take care of our own elders, but recognizing that they're not as able and they may need to develop their own set of formal and informal home and community-based long-term care services. But to their great credit, their public policies first recognize we do need to develop public policies for our aging population, but our resources must first go to whatever allows us to assist families and children to take care of their own in their home and in their communities. In the United States, we did it backwards. When we created Medicare and Medicaid in 1965, the goal was, let's create institutions, hospitals, nursing homes, formal providers to take care of older persons. And we invested so much in that industry that very little was left for the home and community-based services. That is now changing. More and more states are trying to shift more of their Medicaid and Medicare dollars towards home and community-based long-term care services. So the concept here in a diverse population, especially with ethnic minority and immigrant groups, I think helps us to recognize and should influence, hopefully, public policy to continue that pendulum that in terms of scarce public resources, it should go to enable groups like the Village Movement and others to support them to expand that home and community-based system of services where not just family, but friends and neighbors help each other as much as possible and move away as much as possible from where we started, find a good nursing home and place them there. Not that we should not have them. So I use those two examples. Issues of retirement, about the disparities in terms of economic and social opportunities. Caregiving in terms of diversity and immigration is a real plus in terms of trying to recreate that sense of caring for each other.
Are you writing a book that addresses some of these issues?
I'm glad you mentioned that. this book. And we stacked them